And success for me is having the complexion of tech change, so that there's more black and brown CEOs, because I think diversity starts at the top and it starts from the onset.
If you believe we can change the narrative, if you believe we can change our communities, if you believe we can change the outcomes, then we can change the world. I'm Rob Richardson. Welcome to Disruption Now.
Welcome to Disruption Now. I'm your host and moderator, Rob Richardson. With me is Clarence Wooten. He is a man of many talents. He's been a serial entrepreneur, has reinvented himself over and over again, was in this game from Internet 1.0, actually the beginning when the Internet was, not when the Internet first started, but when the Internet started first being commercialized, and is still reinventing himself, still doing a lot out here in Silicon Valley, and is doing a lot to really promote a more inclusive ecosystem. Clarence, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing fantastic. You make me sound like a real old man, but quite frankly, the internet's not that old, at least not the web portion of it. But I definitely feel like an OG when people introduce me that way.
Yeah, well, you're seasoned. You're not an old man because the internet, in terms of how it's commercialized and its use, is not that old, as you said, and it's moving faster than the speed of light at this point in terms of how things are just changing and how fast they are changing. So let's talk a little bit about your journey. You first started off, he said you've sold 2 businesses, I believe, right? But walk me through the beginning when you were just kind of starting off. If you could talk to your younger self, Clarence, when you were just kind of getting into this entrepreneurial world, what advice would you give your younger self, and what advice would you ignore? Wow.
Okay. I think one piece of advice, and there's a saying that goes, a lot of entrepreneurs overestimate what they can achieve in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 10, right? So I think that's one piece of advice I would have given myself, because there were a couple of opportunities where I think I could have built a more meaningful company before exiting. But things weren't moving fast enough for me. And quite frankly, company building is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Right. And I think I would have started investing more earlier, because of how the internet's taken off. Companies can go from zero to, since we were just talking about Clubhouse in 12 months. And so I've had lots of opportunities to be angel investors in companies that became these unicorns, got to $1 billion in valuation. And I wasn't thinking like an investor. I was mostly thinking like an entrepreneur. So I would probably do 2 things simultaneously, a little bit more of both. And it's probably so many more things I would tell myself, but we could probably take the whole show up. Just on those.
Well, I want to talk about that. One point you said, thinking like an entrepreneur and not an investor. What's the difference between those approaches, and how do you kind of think about those as a business person overall? Yeah, well, when you're an entrepreneur, you really are an investor. You're investing in you, right? But you're an investor who's not diversified, because when you go out to build your own company, all of your resources, your capital, your focus is on that, like a laser, which is what it should be. But if the company isn't successful, and you've spent 5 years, then you were not a diversified investor. But when you're an entrepreneur, you're typically in circles with a bunch of other entrepreneurs who are on that same journey. And so really the smart play, if you can, is to find a way to invest in some of the entrepreneurs that you're on that journey with, especially if you're in a space like tech, because one of you is going to make it, almost like being in the minor leagues, right? So you're in the minor leagues, you're playing baseball with a bunch of other players. You guys don't really know who's going to get called up. But if you could invest in each other, so that one guy who gets called up and becomes Albert Pujols, you get a piece of his salary, right? So that's kind of the analogy that I'm using, because you're kind of in that mix with other entrepreneurs doing exciting things, and you're not the only one that has the greatest idea. And even if your idea is successful, you might just end up being an average major league player, versus somebody who becomes the next Babe Ruth, who you knew back when. And you could have been very easily put 10K into what they were doing or less. And that 10K might be 10X what you've made as an entrepreneur. Yeah, that's awesome advice. What advice would you ignore? Advice that you thought that maybe yourself at the time was great advice, or advice you just received from others that you didn't know was horrible advice, but now with your experience, I didn't call you old, but the seasoned experience you have, that like you have better perspective now. What advice would you ignore?
Yeah, I mean, I had advice that I ignored pretty early, and believe it or not, the advice came from my dad.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
Is your dad an entrepreneur?
Well, he was an entrepreneur, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But no. So that advice was always own 51%, right?
Okay.
That way you always have control. Now,
I can see why he'd say that. That makes sense.
I totally got why he said it, but once I really understood that when you're an entrepreneur, I mean, there's two types of entrepreneurs. There's small business owners, right, which they kind of need control. And then there's entrepreneurs trying to change the world. They're trying to get the scale. Like Mark Zuckerberg doesn't own 51% of Facebook, but so that's, percentage ownership is not the biggest control lever for one. And your goal is to turn a grape into a watermelon, right? So I can own 100% of a grape, but that's not nearly worth as much as 20% of a watermelon. But in order to get that grape to watermelon scale, I'm going to have to raise capital and bring in other investors along the way. So I might sell off 20% of that grape to get the capital I need to turn that grape into a plum. And then I sell 30% of that plum off to get the capital I need to turn it into, a grapefruit en route to becoming a watermelon. And then at the end of the day, I own 15 to 20% of that watermelon, but that watermelon is worth $500 million. So my stake is worth $100 million when I could have owned 100% of a grape that was only worth, maybe $3 million. Right. So just understanding leverage and understanding, how to leverage other people's time and capital to get to scale. And so, and that doesn't happen when you are trying to maintain 51% ownership.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what do you think as you're working to be a company, because it's a hard balance, the short term, trying to live day in and day out. And then if you have a business, this is assuming you have a business that is scalable, that can scale. How do you figure out that? What's the best way to kind of measure that balance to make sure you can get to that level? Like what's the central most important, if we had to say, what's the most important essential skill set for a founder to have to become scalable at that level to really go to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I think first a couple things. Market size is almost everything. So if you're building a business to go after that has a very small market size, it's even if you do get to scale, it won't be venture fundable, because if the industry is only a $50 million market, and you bust hump to get to 100% of that market, which no one ever does,
right?
You can only ever have a $50 million business. But if it's a $50 billion market and you only capture a small portion of that market, you can still have $1 billion business. So that's the first ingredient. The next thing, as an entrepreneur, I think you got to recognize that you are an investor. You're not just an entrepreneur. And you're a shareholder in your company. And so very rarely does the skills that was required to go from idea to company and get it to that first $10, $20 million in revenue are the same skills that go from 20 million to 200 million in revenue. And you got to recognize that might not be your skill set.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be. As the founder of the company, you're the largest shareholder. You want to maximize your shareholder return. So, if you get it to 20 million and you realize that it takes a different type of person who couldn't have done what you did to go from 0 to 20 million to now fly that plane and get it to 200 million, then you should gladly maybe step back, take on a role of chairman or chairwoman and have that person scale your company. And you'll learn a lot in that process and be a lot happier. And at the end of the day, you'll make a lot more money. So I think just really being self-aware and understanding that you are a shareholder first and foremost before you're an owner.
I think the word you said that really sticks out is self-awareness, and I believe most people are not self-aware. I think it's very hard to be self-aware because it requires a level of brutal honesty with yourself that most people are not comfortable having. Do you have any methods to help yourself become more self-aware? Like, how do you go about becoming more self-aware?
Methods to becoming more self-aware. I think that it kind of happens over time. I mean, I know that I love the startup process. I love going from idea to 30,000 feet. I'm the guy who's going to assemble the plane and get it off the runway and get it airborne. But I don't necessarily want to fly the plane for 10 years, right? While it's scaling. I would, and so I enjoy the art of the start, right? And that's really where the biggest value is created. And so if you understand that about yourself, and which is part of the reason why I started a venture studio, because it enables me to roll up my sleeves, co-found companies with Black and brown entrepreneurs of color, and help them fly those planes and get them airborne as either a pilot or co-pilot, and then monitor it from air traffic control and just get a bunch of planes up in the air, of which I have, or my team has ownership in those planes. And then when it's time to land those planes, because a big company wants to buy them, to sort of then get involved again, because I have some experience there too. And ultimately, I think that's makes me happier and is a bigger way for me to personally build wealth, because it's what I like to do.
So you see yourself, so the ventures, let's talk about what you're doing right now with the venture studios. How are you guys, what's your mission, and what does success look like for Revitalize Studios 5 years from now?
Yeah, so Revitalize, our mission is to change the complexion of tech by building breakout startups with Black founders and diverse teams. We also kind of have this other piece where we want to empower under-resourced, underestimated communities to achieve equity, right? But the core is in building breakout tech startups with Black founders and diverse teams so that we can change the complexion of tech. So really that's what we're all about. So a lot of people wonder, okay, so what's a venture studio versus a venture fund? I think movie studio is a great analogy, right? So as you can make an independent film and you're an independent filmmaker and you go through all the trouble of, putting it together and trying to get distribution, or you can pitch a film to a studio like a Disney or Warner Brothers, and they'll take your script and work with you and turn that into a film and you'll get a piece. And so that's more of the venture studio model. We aren't just investors, we are co-founding company builders. And success for me is having the complexion of tech change, so that there's more Black and brown CEOs, because I think diversity starts at the top and it starts from the onset. And so if you want to build a diverse company, when that company gets to scale, if the founding DNA wasn't Black or brown, then by the time you get to 1,000 employees, it's not Black or brown, right? So when you look at a company like Google, if one of those founders, Larry or Sergey, if one of those were African-American, you can't tell me that Google wouldn't have 20% Black workforce versus less than 2%, right? And so that's kind of, that's my mission.
Yeah. So how do we, I want to challenge that statement a little bit. I agree, having a culture that's there and having a leadership that there helps. Sometimes though, having people at the top that are different, sometimes it becomes the exception to the rule, but sometimes it reinforces the old rule. So because sometimes it's harder for people if you're at the top of a company, because if it's just you, like I can tell, I was chairman of the board of University of Cincinnati, and I think I believe I did a lot there, but it's also very difficult if there's not a system in place. So how do you balance that out between obviously being a Black person, knowing the systemic challenges that are there, but then figuring out a way to move your company forward that's intentional and inclusive, in a way that actually gets that accomplished? Because it can be, I hear you, but I think it can be very difficult too. Like, how do you balance those two?
Well, first off, I think a lot of it is about networks. So when I look at the anatomy and DNA of how Silicon Valley companies grow, they grow every time they raise a new round of funding.
Yep.
Right. And typically, the guys writing the check look a certain way.
Sure.
Right. So they fund entrepreneurs that look like that. They come from a similar background, similar schools. Right. And they hire a management team from that same background and same schools. And so every time you raise around $10, $20 million, it's time to go out and hire another 100 people. Yep. Right. And so they're relying on the people who are at the top to tap into their networks to hire that next 100 people. And that next 100 people looks exactly like the management team, and so forth and so on after every funding round. But if the top management team was diverse, and I'm not just talking about diverse in terms of complexion, I'm also talking about diverse in terms of education. Like what if Larry or Sergey went to Howard, right, or went to Morehouse?
Exactly.
You don't think they would know any other Black people who would have been, senior leaders at Google and so forth and so on when Google continued to raise money and started to scale? And so that's the way I see it.
Yeah, so I'm curious, you look at this moment right now, we have, there's been more attention on racial justice than there probably ever has been within my lifetime. I mean, we've had, I'm sure you remember Rodney King and what happened then. I do think this is more directed, and it's been more significant in terms of the amount of attention and time and just the intensity of it. From what I've seen within my lifetime, I'm sure the 60s would seem to be more intense than other parts of
I wouldn't know
America.
about that.
But I wouldn't know about it either. But I'm saying right now in my lifetime, this I think is the most significant moment I have seen. What do you think is the opportunity in this moment at this time, and how should people of color, Black and brown folks in the tech world, what opportunities should they take in this moment that may be different than prior moments, if any at all?
No, absolutely. I think it is an opportunity. And the question is, how long will that opportunity last? And a lot of it has to do with us, right? Anytime Black folks have focused on civil rights, our movements have been co-opted by some other group.
Yep.
Okay? So I think we need to be really, really careful and watch against that and make sure things don't get watered down. It continues to be about Black, which is part of the reason why we started at Revitalize this competition called Pitch Black.
Yep.
And if you want to know more about it, you can go to pitchblck.com, Black without the A, to check it out. But what we do is, we're trying to build bridges to close the racial funding gap. There were a number of companies that came out with Black Lives Matter statements and pledged $50 billion to the Black community. But in the past year, only 250 million of that has been deployed. Yep. So we're trying to hold some of these companies accountable to help Black entrepreneurs by doing Pitch Black, where we give the winner $30,000. But we go out and get a sponsor. Our first sponsor, as you know, was Procter & Gamble Venture.
Absolutely.
And one of our upcoming sponsors will be Logitech. But we want all of those companies who made these statements to step up and participate so that we can foster and push Black entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I had this conversation on Roland Martin, and we talked about this being like another opportunity for reconstruction and getting it right and making sure that not only is there ask, but the ask is significant enough that really makes a large impact. Because companies are doing this. Let's be clear, yada yada, right thing to do. That's not why they're doing it. It's also the profitable thing to do. They see that this is where things are going, and they're, as you said, some are trying to figure out a way to get ahead of it in order to figure out a way to commoditize it, not necessarily for improving the lives of Black and brown people, but just improving the bottom line and using us as the leverage. Right now, as we speak, we're talking about the 100-year anniversary of Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre. And there's been a huge movement there to really kind of popularize things and make it kind of like a tourist site, which is okay, but we need to make sure that we're doing stuff, that we're actually investing in Black businesses there, that we're changing opportunities and we're providing long-term impact, because that community was decimated and has never been fully compensated for what happened to them.
Absolutely. And something changed in me when George Floyd happened, right? I've been in Silicon Valley for over a decade building companies, and for a long time I just kind of bit my tongue because I didn't want to quote unquote be blackballed about Sand Hill Road and not able to raise capital. But after George Floyd, I just said F it. And which was part of the motivation for my partner and I, Andre Ford, starting Revitalize.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And we need more people like you. And as you said, we also need to work together more to hold people accountable. Because there's enough money out there. We're not poor. Sometimes we're poorly organized as a community and really working and collaborating together. So I'm glad to make sure that you're doing this, and I'll make sure others are going to know about Pitch to Black and what you guys are doing. I'm curious to get your opinion on the current internet stage we're in right now. I would argue we've been in 3 different stages. We're in our 3rd stage. The first stage was the tech stage. It was just the beginning. people just getting introduced to commerce. The second stage is where we are right now. But I believe we're moving to another stage, the decentralization, the Facebook, the Googles of the world, this decentralization. And now what you're seeing with the blockchain and just the kind of decentralized and the blockchain and all the technology behind that. What do you see in the coming years, given that you've been involved in Silicon Valley for a while? What do you see as the opportunities and maybe the points of caution with blockchain technology as we move into internet, what I call internet 3.0, what a lot of people call internet 3.0?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I actually think a lot of people think a ton of wealth was created over the last decade, and it was, as we went from kind of that Web 2.0 to kind of internet everywhere on mobile. But I actually think more wealth is going to be created over the course of the next decade because we have a convergence, a lot of things converging together. And blockchain is certainly and decentralization is at the center of that. Decentralized finance. I mean, people hear about Bitcoin and they understand it a little bit, but until they really understand how blockchain works and what makes it kind of a game changer, then it's hard for them to wrap their brains around it. But we've seen from 2017, when I first started investing in Bitcoin and other altcoins, the whole market cap of these alternative currencies, et cetera, was like, $250 million. Now it's 2.5 trillion. And that's just going to continue as more and more people take real dollars and buy virtual goods and virtual currencies. And so it's when you hear about, things like Bitcoin, people are like, okay, I can't spend Bitcoin really. What is it really about? And then you hear about Ethereum, which is, it's a protocol, but yet, you still buy a token. Bitcoin is like gold. Ethereum is like owning Microsoft stock.
Yeah, exactly. And people don't understand it. To your point, Ethereum is like another part of the internet. It's like where apps are built on with blockchain technology. People don't understand, like they think it's not just the fact that you can spend money and people value it, and they do. It's a whole nother level of applications that are put on top of it.
Yeah, and then there's a bunch of decentralized finance companies like Compound and et cetera. You can go to DeFi Pulse and see those, and some of those tokens are taken off. And then you got Chainlink, which is an Oracle. I mean, we're in the matrix, really.
Yeah, we are in the matrix, and I do. When people tell me, like I think I'm in the NFT space. We started a platform, a minting NFT platform for diverse artists, collectors, and social impact art. But I've heard people say that, well, I just think the whole thing's a bubble. And I said, some of it is a bubble. You know what? And the internet was a bubble 20 years ago. And ask Jeff Bezos about that bubble and a whole bunch of other people. It's yes, there are people that are just creating things that have no value. So your goal should be figure out those who are creating value and invest in them. That's what you should do.
And even bigger than that, buy and hold, right? Because I had a ton of Amazon stock in 2000, right? I had sold my company in 99. I had a ton of Amazon stock in 2000. When the bubble burst, I got out of all my .com stocks, right? And so yeah, a blockchain is going to be very, very similar. But
that's a great lesson that you had in that. That's a great lesson, Clarence. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think people need to hear that, right? You've been very successful, but had you held on to stock to Amazon, just one stock, right? You've been very successful, but you would probably be enormously more successful had you held on to that stock and not panic in the middle moments. There are going to be down, as you see crypto's going down, there's going to be downturns. It's part of it.
Well, if you look at the charts from Bitcoin's inception, it would go way up and then go way down, way up and go way down. But that cycle started, and it was usually in a 3-year cycle. That cycle started with Bitcoin at less than 1 cent. And now it went way up to 60,000 and then down to 32,000. The next way up is probably going to be 120,000.
Yep. So, hey, definitely stay in the market. Invest, like you said. You said that earlier. Be an investor, and I need to do that more. As I found my company, you find yourself, you put everything in there. You probably should put more into investments that you want. Like I understand these investments, and I understand how Ethereum works, and we should put money aside in things that we're investing in as we are growing. Not to say you don't believe your company will be that next level, but your companies became very successful. But you also could have been, and you still have been, a very largely successful investor, but you could have been more had you had that mentality. All right. So go ahead.
No, I was saying, no, I was disagreeing with you.
So, all right. So rapid fire questions. I love to ask people here. So you have a committee of 3, living or dead, to advise you on life, business, personal. Who are these 3 people and why?
Wow. That's a really interesting thing. A committee of 3, living or dead.
It could be a mixture thereof.
Okay. Well, Jesus Christ would be one.
That's a good one.
Okay.
What would you ask Jesus right now? You're here. Boom.
Just, keep me mind, body, soul balance, right? He would be a spiritual advisor. I think I would focus on that there because I believe in those things. You can have all the money in the world, and if your mind's not right, if your spirit's not right,
yep.
You won't enjoy it, and you won't get the most of your time here.
It'll come crashing down one way or another. If it's not financial, it'll be spiritual. If it's not spiritual, it'll be physical. It'll likely be a combination in some way of all 3. I agree with you.
That's right. Maybe Reginald Lewis.
Okay, that's a good one.
Okay, so, I read a book about Reginald Lewis. He's also from Baltimore. I'm originally from Baltimore. It was called Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun?
Yep.
When I was young in my career. And, it totally, it was transformative because, you can't be what you can't see. And he was a brother who was doing it at a much, much bigger level. He was the first Black billionaire in the early 90s, late 80s, pretty much when he bought Beatrice Foods. Yeah, I'd like to get his perspective because I feel like he was ahead of his time. And, the last one is interesting. I don't really have one that comes to mind as clearly as the first 2.
Okay.
Because
it could be 2. If you got 2, that's good. That's fine.
Let's go with those 2 for now.
Okay.
I'm sure I could have chose. I'm sure number 3 would be, also incredible, but I would need more time to think about it.
Oh, no problem. All right. When's the time you failed, but it seemed like a failure at the time, but later on it became really a good learning lesson and it helped set you up for greater success?
I failed 1,000 times like that. But whenever you're doing a startup, you got to realize.
What stands out? What particular moment stands out though? There's got to be 1 or 2 that really are like, okay, this moment was like, man, this was rough.
Right. So here's an example. It might be a little controversial. So I
like controversial. This is disruption now. Go.
Of course. Well, I did a startup called Arrived, and I moved to Silicon Valley, moved my entire team to Silicon Valley in late 2010. And we launched on stage at TechCrunch Disrupt. And, I'd already had some success as an entrepreneur. So I figured we would be able to go to the VCs on Sand Hill Road and raise money easily. At least get a Series A done. So I was confident that we would be able to continue to pay payroll. We had raised maybe a couple $100,000 to get the company to where it was. And I thought we had, enough traction to do that. And we couldn't raise the money. And that's the challenge of being Black in America. You don't necessarily know. Could you not raise the money because your stuff wasn't good, or because could you not raise the money because you weren't the right hue?
Right. My guess is the second one if you've already had traction, but go ahead.
Yeah. And so, I started to look around. I realized that the guys who were raising money were young 20-something white males.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that company went under, but I learned a valuable lesson from that. So when I started my next company, Progressly, I played it a little differently. I went out and, after Progressly had traction and we had an early product, instead of me doing the pitching, I went and found a young white male who was connected to the Valley, and he did the pitching. And guess what? We raised $8 million.
Wow. You know what? And you say that story in 2010, and it's both depressing but not surprising. On another show, I had Chauncey Mayfield. He was one of the first brothers to raise $1 billion in real estate. And he had a similar tactic. Like they would go in and have the real estate just about closed and the deal be done. And then they see that they look on paper, recognize that was a black colleger, see him in person, and then not do the deal. So finally, he just started. He had a person front that was a white person, right? And then he started closing deals. Then he had like $200 or $300 million. These people didn't even know that he was the person that owned all this stuff. So one day he just decided to show up, Clarence. You love this. He decided to show up. They knew Chauncey Mayfield. They assumed he was a white guy. He decided to show up in the middle of the street by the corner of his building. And he told the building manager he was coming out. And then the guy, he was just sit there. And the guy was looking around, looked past him. He kept seeing him. He kept looking. He was looking. He was like, I'm looking for somebody. Like he said, did you see anybody out here? He said, no. And then Chauncey said, I might be able to help you. Who you looking for? He said, no, you probably wouldn't know. He said, oh, give me a try. What's his name? He said, Chauncey Mayfield's name. He said, that's me. I looked at him like, I mean, the fact is he had to tell that story in the 90s and you have to tell that story in 2010. I would like to believe that 2020 made people more enlightened, but I'm also not naive.
And then you look at the 40s, and I think there was a movie on Apple TV called The Banker, right? You know, they pretty much did the same thing in the 30s and 40s. And so unfortunately that song goes on. So hopefully post George Floyd, all this quote unquote capital committed to black businesses and black founders will change some of that discussion. But, unfortunately it's a reality. And for me, you tell me how to play the game, I'm going to play the game according to those rules, even if I don't like the rules.
Yep. And then break them when you get the rule, when you get in the game. You can break the rules once you understand the game and understand the rules. But I look at this moment right now. I think this is a window in time, just like Reconstruction was, just like the post 60s was. And I still think, I love America, but also understand where I'm at too. People will regress to the mean because it's so in our DNA to do this that I'm talking about black people right now, have to take advantage of this moment to create as much opportunity and as much wealth and to build from this moment going forward. That's what I think.
Yeah, and to be vertically integrated. I mean, one of the things I love about Tyler Perry is that he built an entire studio kind of his way outside of Hollywood in Atlanta. And knows his market. And so we're trying to do something similar with Revitalize. And
you guys can do that through you talked about through crowdfunding. I know you were talk a little bit about, that's a great point because we didn't talk about this moment right now, that of crowdfunding and being able to invest, not just in, just like in 2010, you didn't have many other options. Now you would have the option to go out and go crowdfunding with people that understand who you are, and you can, just like a campaign, go out there and build. Talk about what you see as the opportunity with crowdfunding going forward and what you guys are doing in that moment.
Well, that's what we're doing at Revitalize. We want to democratize. I mean, it's not only the entrepreneurs, who are getting wealthy in Silicon Valley when they get funded. It's the investors who are getting wealthy when they get funded. And historically, investors couldn't invest in a private company unless you're accredited, which means you already have a certain amount of wealth.
You're already rich, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which left out lots of black and brown people. But when Obama was in office in 2012, he implemented the Jobs Act. And a piece of the Jobs Act was about crowdfunding, allowing non-accredited investors to be able to write checks, even $250 checks. And so, and they've updated those laws and they made them even more favorable recently. And so we're building our studio at Revitalize on that notion. We don't just want to make a bunch of, already wealthy investors more wealthy by having them back our startups. We want to bring our startups to the people and democratize access as investors. And so instead of us having like 10 investors, we might have 10,000. And we administer that through a platform called Republic is who we typically use.
Oh yeah, Republic's great. Yes.
And so, but ultimately, it allows our people to become investors. And so when we create these, black CEOs who are running black billion-dollar unicorn startups, those earliest investors who do the best will be people who look like the founding teams they're supporting. And so that's a big chunk of what we're doing at Revitalize. Now, you can't just invest in any crowdfunding campaign. You really need to be part of a community. So we're creating a community of what we call Revitalizers. So if you go to revitalizeventures.com, you can give us your email address and join our community. And we'll educate you on a whole space and give you opportunities to invest in companies that have the potential to be unicorns.
That's awesome. We love to work with you on that to get more people connected to what you're doing. I think it's great work, and it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, we have to look at ways to.
I'm gonna hold you to that.
Oh no! Oh, don't worry. I will definitely follow up. We'll definitely work together on that because I think it's so important for our community. I've been involved in a long time trying to find ways to change constructs and really have a collective impact. And I've come to the belief that while it's important to make sure you hold government accountable, that you understand what's going on and you vote. Nobody's coming to save us. Like there's superheroes are for the comic books. We have to collectively come together and save ourselves because nobody's coming. Like at the end of the day, it's not going to happen. I'm not saying don't get involved. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that by itself is not going to resolve all the issues for us. We have to get involved, make sure we vote, and most importantly, and collectively organize. And that means more than just voting for people. It means also investing in each other. So I think what you're doing is so important.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that, bro. And I've always subscribed to that, right? Social Security isn't even going to save me, right? So I've never depended on that. It's part of the reason I've been an entrepreneur, and nobody's coming to save us. And quite frankly, we shouldn't want that.
No, look, I agree. And it's not going to happen anyway. So you might want it. You might think it's a good idea. I don't care what the model looks like. It is not going to save us. It's just not going to work. All right. So another question I like to ask is a controversial one. What's an important truth you have or conviction that very few people agree with you on? It's a hard question on purpose.
That very few people can agree with me on. I'm an agreeable kind of guy. Right. What I say is pretty logical. Most people, agree with it, except for my kids half the time. But let me think. A truth, a conviction that very few people agree with me on. Can you give me an example?
I'll give you my example. So most people like to believe that they are good people. Collectively, I would say human history and science say that that's not true. The truth is it's easier than you think to become Nazi Germany. Like people look at Nazi Germany and like, oh my God, how could that happen? My question to people is, how can you not understand how that could happen? And it's because people are easily influenced by crowds. People lack real self-awareness, almost without exception, because it's very hard to become self-aware. Robert Greene, one of my favorite authors, says this about in his book, The Laws of Human Nature. His first law is about the law of irrationality. The first rule of becoming rational is to recognize that you are irrational. Again, people like to believe that they are rational, that they're autonomous. The truth is, you're not as autonomous and as rational as you think you are. And you have to work night and day to make sure you're fighting against your own irrationality and your own biases in order to be that good person that you hope to be. That's my fear.
Well, I put it this way. Here's one. When I first got to Silicon Valley, there was this whole thing going around that Silicon Valley was a meritocracy, right? Meaning you excel based on your own merits. A lot of my, white friends or, very educated friends believed that to be true. They weren't Black, obviously, but they believed that to be true. And now those same folks understand that it's not true. And part of the reason why they believed it to be true is because Silicon Valley is, even though they think it's diverse, it's not diverse, it's international, right? That's correct. It's international, but it's not diverse. And you could come to America from India, with a strong tech background and make it in Silicon Valley faster than you can if you can come from than if you come to Silicon Valley from East Baltimore with a strong tech background, right? Because they're baked in biases of people who write the checks, that a person from India is more likely to be a successful tech founder and technical person than a person from East Baltimore who's brown. And so Silicon Valley by no means is a meritocracy. And I think George Floyd showed us that America is certainly not a meritocracy. So that was it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Final question. You have a billboard or a Google ad to be 21st century that has your theme or saying. What does that say and why?
21st century to be theme, a big billboard or a Google ad. It would be about becoming a revitalizer, right? Because I think that's how we change the complexion of tech, and we got to do it in a vertically integrated way, right? The money needs to come from people that look like us and allies. You know, and when we can prove that we can invest in us and build things at scale, you know, I talked about turning grapes into watermelons. You know, everybody can get a piece of that watermelon, right? We just got to focus on getting it to a watermelon. And certain of us, you know, some of us know how to do it. And I feel like I'm one of those people, but it takes a community to do it together. And so it would be about going to revitalizeventures.com, giving us your email address. We're getting ready to launch a new website that really speaks to this, and becoming a revitalizer.
All right, Clarence Wooten, we're definitely going to, I can tell you, Disruption Now will become a revitalizer. We'll talk about how we do it. And we look forward to seeing all the great work that you will do. Clarence, thank you for taking time to come on the show.
Thanks, Rob. It's been great.